Good afternoon and welcome to the FEMA Region 2 Individual and Community Preparedness Webinar Series. My name is Allison Albright and I'm the Regional Preparedness Liaison for FEMA Region 2. I'm going to provide a few technical considerations before we begin. Today's proceedings are being recorded and captioned. The archived event will be available on the FEMA website in the coming weeks. You should hear audio through your computer speakers, so please ensure your volume is turned up so we hear the proceedings accordingly. In the top right corner, we ask if you'd like to receive news and updates from Region 2. If so, please enter your email address and we'll be sure to add you to the distribution list. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation concludes. You'll see a Q&A pod in the lower right-hand corner. Please feel free to submit your questions about the subject matter there, and time permitting, we'll do our best to answer them. Finally, the PowerPoint presentation from today will be available for you to download in the file SharePod as a PDF. You can click on the file and download it using the download button. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the Region 2 Preparedness Specialist to introduce our speaker and today's proceedings.
Good afternoon, everyone. Did you know that FEMA's #1 goal in our strategic plan is to build a culture of preparedness? The Region 2 Individual and Community Preparedness Program is focused on preparing individuals and communities for disasters by providing useful information and training, inspiring people to act and be ready for any emergency. My name is Bijal Patel. I'm the Preparedness Specialist for FEMA Region 2. On behalf of our team working across New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar series. I'm pleased to be hosting today's webinar on how amateur radio volunteers can be utilized before, during, and after disasters. Our two guest speakers today are Bill Brummond and Greg Foster. Bill Brummond has bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees in geotechnical engineering. He got his first amateur radio license in 1993 and currently holds an amateur extra license. He became more active in amateur radio activities after moving to Florida, where he began to work closely with the emergency manager director in Nassau County. Today, many Nassau County amateur radio operations volunteers in the Emergency Operations Center and provide situational awareness 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. During emergencies, the amateur radio volunteers provide communications in shelters, in other locations, and staff the EOC 24/7. Our second speaker is Greg Foster, who is a Florida native and the director of Nassau County Emergency Management. He has been with the Nassau County Sheriff's Office for 27 years. 25 years on the law enforcement side, and now 2 years on the emergency management side. He has served as logistics section chief during several emergencies, as operations section chief for Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and as incident commander during Hurricane Dorian and the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccination operations. Welcome, Bill and Greg, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Brummond, and I'd like to talk to you about the effective use of amateur radio volunteers in county emergency operations. What I want to try to talk to you about today, or what I'm going to address, is how the director will need additional resources in an emergency. And you can get the resources from national groups, state groups, and within your own county. Oftentimes, because of shelters and other places, there's often a need for expanded communication assets, and we'll talk about them. And if you're going to need communication assets, why not try to embrace the local amateur radio operators that have many of the skills that might be useful in an emergency? How do you find them? How should you contact the amateur radios? And how is the director going to effectively train the amateurs so they can do their job in the emergency management system? Let's talk about emergency hierarchy of emergency support. There's lots of support. There's lots of resources. In the national realm, you have FEMA, Red Cross, ham radio, that's what ARRL is, and ARES, Salvation Army, and other groups. At the state level, there's lots of logistical supplies, water, food, cots, deployable communications, and other supplies. But when you get down to the county level, all crises and all emergencies are really local issues. The emergency management director is responsible for the management of the emergency, not the state, not the federal group. It's a local issue. And the need for enhanced communications is rampant within the EOC itself, because you're going to have extra communications 24/7 in shelters, in staging areas, in points of distribution, in hospitals. And where are all these radio people or communications people coming from? You can get the ham radio operators, but they need to be trained by the director or have him support the training of ham volunteers in the National Incident Management System, the ICS, Incident Command System, and other issues, so the volunteers can effectively work within the emergency management, the emergency at the time, and with the EOC personnel. In terms of way of background, ARRL stands for Amateur Radio Relay League. It's a national entity devoted only to amateur radio. ARRL is a registered acronym for Amateur Radio Emergency Service, which is a subset of amateur radio. And ARRL has officers in each state and in 2 territories. And in larger states, they may have 3 or 4 people in a section, and they're called section managers, who are the people for ARRL local information. In most states, each county has an ARES emergency coordinator, an EC, and supporting people called assistant emergency coordinators if they're needed, and I'm one of them in Nassau County, Florida. So how do you find hands to help in an emergency? Well, there's several ways of doing it, but one of the things is the emergency management director would talk to the state watch officer, and the state watch officer would contact ARRL members, and they would cast a net across lots of counties and potential different states to say, hey, can anybody deploy and come down to this county because they have a need? Well, you can do that, and certainly that's a way that things work when it's in Puerto Rico and places like that, but it may not be the best way to do it in local counties in various states, because the potential radio operators that are dropped into a particular venue may not have all the credentials. Do they have background checks done? What skills do they have? There are task books. ARRS has a task book where you have 3 different categories: a junior, moderate, and a level 3, which is pretty self-sufficient in terms of setting up antennas, running all kinds of radios, and making different cables and put things together. So what level person do you need? Well, if you bring radio operators in from an unfamiliar area, they're going to have little understanding of the communications infrastructure. Where are the repeaters? Where are the frequencies? They don't know where the roads, the shelter, and the infrastructure is. If their mission is then to handle traffic, the imported hams are going to be hampered because they don't know the area. If it's a health and welfare issue where they're using high-frequency radios and communicating loved ones in different states and different countries, they could do that pretty well. I think there's a better way to do it. Or we think there's a better way to do it. and that's prior to an emergency. Have the emergency management director reach out to the local ARRL clubs and the county emergency coordinator and ask if there's any hams that are interested in working in the EOC, and do this way before the emergency. The director may approach the folks and say, next line. They should say, are you interested in visiting the EOC? Well, hey, we'll give you a room if you want a spot in the EOC for you to work in. The director may say, I'll fund buying gear for you, and you can make up go kits. And I'm going to train the volunteers in FEMA and DHS and state courses in emergency management issues. And it's a great way for hams to meet the personnel in the EOC and develop a trust factor with the EOC. One of the things that the emergency director is going to require is background checks done for all the hams that are going to be volunteers, whether they're in the EOC or if they deploy to shelters. At least in our county, anybody that's going to work in the EOC or shelters have to have background checks. So one of the advantages of using the local hams is that the local hams already know where the local roads are, schools, churches, and shelters. If there's an activation, it doesn't require the volunteer to have a distant deployment. That's a big plus. They're going to be working in the same county they live in. And all the hams that are in the county are already using the amateur repeaters. It's their own equipment. It's their own infrastructure that's in place. So they know where everything is, and they know all about the amateur radio equipment. Now, there's a big difference in the equipment that's of interest. The government EOC sheriff's equipment needs to be robust. The equipment's intended to work reliably in hostile weather. Amateur radio equipment isn't that way. We don't even have the cost. We don't have the money to do that. So our equipment's resilient. Power goes out. Areas operators can switch to batteries, and within an hour or so, we can deploy another antenna, and away you go. A benefit of this is the amateur equipment is totally separate from all the police and primary EM equipment. In an emergency, redundancy and ways to communicate is really valuable. About 2 years ago in one of the hurricanes, we had an incident where the entire 911 800 megahertz system went down for about an hour because the generator went on and off and on and off. And we were working, I was working in the emergency operations room, and the director came in and said, well, you're all we got right now because everything, all of our radio systems are down. And that was because the generator flipped back and forth a couple of times, and finally said, we're not going to do it. Once the technicians went out to the tower, they just manually turned the generator on and everything was going fine. But for a few minutes, an hour or so, we were the only communications in the county. So what are advantages for the local approach? As the hams volunteer in the EOC, they really develop a trust factor and a comfort level between the staff and the hams. So if there's no hurricane, what does everybody do? What do the volunteers do during the year? Well, we go to all of the shelters and the hospitals and staging areas and check all the antennas and all the coaxial cables every year prior to hurricane. We help install antennas. We design and build go kits. The EOC should have UHF and VHF go kits for all the shelters and the hospitals. In addition, most of the hams have their own go kits, and some of them may have HF capability, which is not, that means they can talk all over the country. Other things that need to be done during the year is to maintain a communications trailer that the county has for the volunteers. Some of the gear in the trailers are UHF and VHF radios, 800 megahertz radios, TrackStar units with satellite phones, small and large generators. There's just a lot of stuff to do. So what would you do if you were going to deal with the hams? First of all, the EOC needs to develop a memorandum of understanding with the ARRL people as to what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and what benefits they may get. The EOC needs to provide training in FEMA and DHS and other courses. For example, as an entry, the ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800 is kind of, lots of folks have that. But beyond that, for the incident command system, ICS 300 and 400, and then courses on staging areas and points of distribution. Lots of others. There's about 6 or 8 of our volunteers that have gone through COM-L and COM-T, which are nearly week-long courses. Most of the CWOs, or county watch officers, have passed more than 20 courses each. So we have a pretty good idea of how the EOC works and where we fit into the system. If a director supports this, the ham should serve as county watch officers as often as possible. And if they get to know the EOC personnel, they'll probably get access cards for the EOC. Most of us have, I have access to the EOC, the Sheriff's Office, and 911 Center 24/7. The EOC may provide uniforms and so on for the volunteers to make everybody feel like we're a team. What do county watch officers do? Well, we work in the EOC on a regular basis. We didn't start this way, but now we're able to staff the EOC. It's usually 4 hours each. So we have 10 people as a minimum for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We also deal with WebEOC, which is an integrated computer system that many counties in the state have. So when we talk about 214 forms, which is your activity log, we don't do anything on paper anymore. It's all done on WebEOC, and if there's something that we tag as a CWO, we can say it's a regular thing or it's a mid or somebody, it's got to be a higher priority. We can tag it, and the people will see a higher tag, and they can look at it right away in the ICS, Incident Command System. The Nassau County area's hams have capability using WinLink in case Wi-Fi goes down. They can pass traffic over the radio without dealing with any of the other infrastructure. So what does a CWO person do while they're on their shift? Well, they certainly monitor UHF and VHF repeaters. There's a HF North Florida emergency net that's at 9 o'clock every morning. There's SARNet. I'll talk to us about SARNet in a minute. We monitor the Coast Guard radios, particularly Channel 22. We listen and monitor 911 radio on 800 megahertz and the 911 CAD display. We've got a 800 megahertz radio with Duval. Duval is the county where Jacksonville is, and that's the big brother to the south. We have Florida Gator maps for rain and events, accidents on roads and so on. HERVAC, which is a National Weather Service, Corps of Engineers, and National Weather Service for hurricanes when needed. River stage heights in local rivers. The county we're in is prone for flooding with the St. Mary's River, which drains North Florida and South Georgia. Miscellaneous traffic on scanners and TV forecasts. That provides an element of situational awareness to the director. As we see it, we can go over and talk to him, and where we operate is one office, and across the hall is where the director sits. Now, if you're going to be involved with 911 and 800 megahertz radios, you have to pass a CJIS, Criminal Justice Information System, for training every 2 years if you're going to be legally allowed to use the 800 megahertz systems. Florida SARnet is unique. I think South Carolina has something similar. But it was conceived by the amateur radio operators who manage the Florida DOT communication system. And they were worried that if Wi-Fi goes down, they're not going to be able to have effective communications with their departments or people across the state. So the DOT approached amateur groups and said, hey, we'll give you a spot on 36 of the DOT's towers, and if you can put a UHF repeater there. Now, this basically forms a network of linked UHF voice repeaters that serves the entire state. Most of the time, if you got a repeater, it's going to be within maybe 100 or 200 miles. But with a system like this linked UHF VoiceNet, we can talk all over the entire state of Florida. Where we live is in a northeast county. We can talk clear copy and be well heard in Islamorada down in the Florida Keys and over to Pensacola in the west. It's 300 or 400 miles in each direction. And SARnet has been really invaluable in many of our past hurricanes. And these towers are pretty robust. They have large generators and large fuel tanks, and it's a robust system, not a resilient system, as I talked to before. To give you an idea of what that looks like, the green towers are how Florida is covered. And if you have and all of the frequencies on those green towers, we've programmed into our radios. So if we're ever deployed, if I go to Fort Lauderdale, I can turn on the Fort Lauderdale frequency and talk all across the state. Where we live in Yulee is in the northeast corner. With respect to radio programming, what we've done in our county is look at all of the neighboring counties, and we've got all of the frequencies for their radio repeaters and ours, all the simplex frequencies, all of the SARnet frequencies. We've looked at the National Interoperability Field Operations Guide, NIFOG, and taken a number of frequencies from there that may be useful, and also the Florida Communications Fields Operation Guide, frequencies that are appropriate that we might need, and also local frequencies from hospital radios, fire department, forest department, railroads, county departments, school buses, and GMRS and FMRS frequencies. All of those are in all of the county radios, volunteer radios, and most of the hams that work in the EOC. Now, there's a lot of frequencies, but 95% of the time, we're using less than 20 frequencies and that it could be 95% of the time it's probably 10 frequencies. But we have it if we need it. So one of the things it's worth bringing up is that what are some of the potential impediments? And Greg Foster has done a great job with us, because one of the downfalls is the impression that, well, hams don't really know how the EOC works, and we don't want to have to mess with them. Or the EM director might not want to take the time to train and coddle a bunch of old guys who like to talk on the radio. And then in some counties there may be pushback from the police and fire department unions about bringing volunteers into the EOC when the director could hire fire and sheriff's people when they're off duty. Well, they can do that, but do the off-duty fire and sheriff's people have the skills? Do they have an FCC license? Do they understand the difference between simplex and repeater communications? Do they know the difference between offset and tones, and can they solder connections and deploy antennas? I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that goes on that the hams can do, and maybe not everybody else can. So I'm going to out our county, because I think it's a success story. We're a small county, but we have over 120 radio operators on our roster. Population of Nassau County is only 90,000 people. That's 0.4% of the population of the state of Florida. But we have 70 ham radio operators come to the monthly meetings. Over 24 of them are very active in the EOC. And if we have emergencies, we can muster over 24 members to staff shelters, staff staging areas, staff points of distribution, work 24/7 on the EOC, staff the hospital if it remains open. So we sense that we're wanted, respected, and we have a great relationship with the emergency director, the emergency staff, the sheriff's personnel. I think that's a success story. Some of the other things that we do is we have barbecue events each year, 2 of them, to help raise money to buy more gear. The money is used to buy radios and antennas, gears to help ARRLs, and to help EOC for us to serve the EOC more effectively. And during the year, we provide support for large bicycle ride events and active in field day. It's just a great group of people that like what we're doing and are happy working with the county. So how have our hams handle deployments? Well, from 2014 to 2020, we've had 7 activations in Nassau County. 4 were hurricanes, 2 were wildfires, and 1 other event. Outside the county, we've had 6 events, 4 for lost persons and 2 for hurricane-related issues. And exercises outside of the county in Florida and in Camp Blanding and other places, 4 events. So we've been pretty reliable at activations. In summary, the EOC and our ARRLs group are an integrated team. We feel that we're embedded in the fabric of the EOC. And over the 6 years that we've been doing this, I think there's mutual respect, a big trust factor, a comfort level. And the director uses some of the ARRLs members as a force multiplier. Instead of having a small full-time staff, he can call on 20 or 24 guys that are all vetted to help in other EOC matters, whatever it is. We've got a great relationship and a can-do attitude. In closing, I think the icing on the cake is the federal reimbursement to counties after an emergency declaration. Under the Stafford Act, 75% of the cost, allowable cost, will be paid by the government, 12.5% by the state, and 12.5% by the county. But the county can have a credit against using the volunteer hours at a FEMA rate. So the volunteer hours in Nassau County and the potential Stafford Act credit for the past 3 years, the last year we had 6,700 hours worked in the EOC. At an approximate rate of $26, that's about $175,000 of a potential credit that the county will not have to pay. So the numbers, you submit your request to FEMA, and they will accept some and not some other costs. That's beyond my pay grade, but there's a lot of hours, and it's a significant credit for the county. We'll be happy to talk to you with questions later, but that's all I have. Greg, would you take over now?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. Good job on that. So I am Greg Foster. I'm Director of Emergency Management in Nassau County, Florida. We actually get mistaken for Nassau County, New York every once in a while on the phone. We're quite a bit smaller than Nassau County, New York. Like Bill said, we've got about 90,000 people, give or take. We are a Florida coastal county, Atlantic Coast County. In Nassau County, emergency management is part of the Sheriff's Office. It's actually a division of the Sheriff's Office, answerable to the Sheriff except for during activation for disaster, and then we fall under the Board of County Commissioners and the County Manager. Like Bill said, we are a small county and we are a small agency. Emergency management has myself as the director. We have 4 full-time personnel and 1 part-time personnel that they're on my yearly staff. So we rely heavily on volunteers in our county, and especially the ARRL personnel. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the ARRL group. We have a very robust ARRL group in Nassau County. When I took this job, I thought that everybody had a good relationship or a large cadre of ARRL personnel. And talking to my coworkers around the state, that's not the case. So we spend a lot of our time going around telling them that you may want to interact with your ARRL personnel. When we go into a hurricane activation, which unfortunately in the last 15 years or so has been quite often, one of the first calls we make is to the ARRL group. And fortunately for us, we actually have the county watch office at staff, so most of the time it's just walking across the hallway from my office to the county watch office to tell them that we have the intent to activate into a hurricane activation. Like Bill said, we rely on them in all different types of activations. Obviously, being in Florida, coastal county, hurricanes is one of the main things that we plan for, we prepare for. And during hurricanes, we have ARRL personnel at every shelter that we open. Typically, we'll open up 5 or 6 shelters. We'll have 5 or 6 groups of people that are out there manning the ham radios. But we do have 16 schools in Nassau County, and if I needed 16 groups of people to go out, I know that I could call on ARRL to have those people go out and man the shelters. In addition to that, we use them pre-storm in helping in the planning section. We use them during the actual event going through to keep a situational awareness with what we have going on in the county. And then post-storm, we use them for ham radio operations. We use them to assist FEMA in going around and checking for the windshield, look at the damage in the county to verify the damage that we have from whatever storm has gone through us. One of the main things that I found becoming an emergency management director in Nassau County was that not only are they great volunteers in ARRLs, they're great people that come in and are willing to do just about anything you ask them to do, including deploying to areas that have been hit by major hurricanes. But I also found out that I've got a lot of people with a lot of background that if I did not know them through the ARRL system, I wouldn't know what they were capable of doing. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody who's involved with ARRLs or draw people out in particular, but I actually have two generals, retired generals from the Army in my ARRLs group. I've got an engineer that is world famous, civil engineer, structural engineer that is world renowned for his knowledge and ability. I've got IT professionals, I've got financial professionals, I've got a huge cadre of people that come with so much experience in their background that not only deals with the fact that they're good at their job in ARRLs, but they can also come in and do other things for me in this office on so many different levels, bringing their training experience that they've had from their past. We obviously, being in Florida, we deploy a lot. And almost every time we deploy, we take somebody from ARRLs with us, either to man a ham radio if we're going into an area that's been affected and does not have direct communications at the time that we're deploying, or bringing them along with some of the other training that they've gotten through the ICS and NIM system, planning section chiefs. We bring them in all kinds of different positions in the ICS system. Give you a little bit of explanation of how we use them when they deploy. During Hurricane Michael, which struck the Panhandle very hard as a Category 5 hurricane and devastated the Mexico Beach, Panama City Beach area, went up into Georgia, almost all communications was lost. Data, landlines, 800 megahertz, there was no way for these people to get in touch with Tallahassee and let them know what their condition was. So I did not deploy. I was at my regular job with the sheriff's office. Then one day they called me up from the EOC and said, hey, can you come over here and enter in a logistics request through the web EOC system? We've got a ham radio operator in Jackson County, Florida, who has gotten in touch with us, and they need help. They can't get in touch with Tallahassee. Give you a little bit of an idea of the geographic situation in that Jackson County is actually 244 miles to our west in the Panhandle, basically just a little bit northeast of Panama City Beach. Tallahassee is between us and Jackson County, but they were able to get in touch with us over the ham radio network. They advised me of what they needed, and because we did not have any effects from Hurricane Michael, I was able to put in the mission request, send them to Tallahassee, and they got the resources that they needed without having any communications other than a ham radio operator that happened to deploy and happened to be there and was able to get in touch with us 244 miles away. I could go through benefit after benefit like that. I've seen it happen so many times between doing stuff like that or actually responding to areas that were struck by Category 4 hurricanes, and were able to get 800 megahertz systems up and running quicker than what they would have been able to do using their regular personnel. Down in the Florida Keys during Hurricane Irma, one of our ham radio operators was able to get their 800 megahertz system back up and running within a few hours, and they were told it was going to be a few days by the normal people to go in and work on the system. So like I said, they bring a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge. And if you just take the time to sit down and meet with your ARRLs personnel that are in your county or your jurisdiction, you're going to find a lot of people out there that come with just a tremendous amount of experience, a tremendous amount of knowledge. And basically it costs me a few $100s a year in uniforms. And then when I have surplus budgetary monies at the end of the year that for whatever reason we weren't able to use, I always designate a small amount of that to the ARRLs group so that they can get additional radios, towers, whatever equipment that they may need. It's a very small price to pay for the amount of knowledge, experience, and a very motivated group of volunteers that come with a very specialized talent to be able to use the ham radio operating systems. So then we move into COVID-19 and vaccines. So we move into the pandemic. Obviously, some of our ARRL personnel are of the age group that were at the greatest risk with the pandemic. But even with that being said, we still had people that were working for us as volunteers throughout the system, throughout the pandemic. We were just having to do it in a little bit safer manner. We move into vaccines. I go to one of our megapods, one of our large pods for vaccines, and what do I see? 3 or 4 ARRL personnel that came up there to get their vaccines and then wound up staying around and volunteering because that's what's in their heart. That's who they are. They mostly are retired, and they came in, they saw a need, they saw that we did not have enough resources at that vaccination center, and was able to come in and supplement us without even being asked. They just stepped in and started doing what needed to be done. In addition to that, our incident management team for Region 3 in Florida, which is a 13-county area stretching from the Gulf of Mexico over to just north of Daytona Beach and then up to us in Nassau County, is one of the more robust incident management teams in Florida. We deploy for all natures of disasters in Florida, outside of Florida. We've gone as far as South Carolina to the north, across to Louisiana to the west for any number of missions. But we actually are also part of the incident response team for Turkey Point nuclear power plant in Miami. And one of our personnel that are involved in that process is an ARRL volunteer. He's a COML, and he's also a planning section chief, and he donates his time to come because he enjoys it, and he likes to deploy and have that experience, and we like to have his expertise that he brings with him and the ability to call on him anytime that we need it. So in conclusion, it's my recommendation as an emergency management director that everybody reach out to their ARRL groups in their counties. Like I said, they come with so much experience, so much knowledge, and if you reach out to them and you have a sit down with the leadership of the ARRL group, you're going to find that these are some of the more motivated volunteers who are willing to do anything that you need them to do, but happy to provide the unique talents to be able to reach over hundreds of miles away when communications go down, when you're in that extreme need because you have a disaster that has occurred in your county. You've got a group of people in your county that are able to help you and able to provide that continuance of communications that is so important. Every time we hear of a disaster, we hear that communications is the first thing that goes down, and the biggest problem that everybody has. You have people in your county that can help you with that. You just have to reach out, have conversations with them, build a relationship with them, and like Bill said, build that trust. The leadership of our ARRL group in Nassau County, I trust as well as any of the police officers I work with or any of my staff. I've sat down, I've talked to them, I've built those relationships, and they have provided more than what my expectations would be of a volunteer cadre of people. And I am available for any question.
Great. Thank you, Bill and Greg. We do have several questions. The first is a comment from an audience member. He says that the problem is that many emergency management directors do not support having hams in the EOCs or in the shelters. Do you have any recommendations for him?
Sure. You've got to sell the program. I wasn't in emergency management when ARRL was first brought in. That was a previous emergency management director that I worked very closely with. But they were already in the spot when I came in about 2 years ago and took over the department. But I know exactly what he did. He went to the sheriff, who he answered to because he was not under activation, and he had a conversation with the sheriff and the command staff of the sheriff's office to let them know what the benefit would be and sell the idea of having volunteers come in. In addition, he went to the Board of County Commissioners and had the same conversation with them. It's just kind of thinking outside the box, thinking about how you can force multiply your staff. And all you really have to do is start having those conversations with everybody, start vetting. We have a robust vetting process. We make sure of their criminal history. We have them fill out applications. We treat them just like a police officer that we were going to hire, and go through and just build that trust in them and their trust in you. And it's an easy sell when you start talking about the Stafford Act reimbursement of volunteer hours. Bill had mentioned last year we had about 6,000 some odd hours of volunteer time, and a lot of that was ARRS. This year so far, and we're only at the end of March, we have 5,000 plus hours of volunteer hours with Nassau County Emergency Management, mainly because of the vaccinations that are going on in COVID. But still, we have, if we were going to have to pay that 12.5% of the Stafford Act reimbursement, we would be well along the way just based on our volunteer hours.
Okay. Well, that kind of leads me to our next question. How would a ham operator get a government background check, and who would pay for it? Do you have any ideas?
Sure. I don't know about everywhere else, but in Florida we've got 3 different types of emergency management offices. You have ones that are standalone under the Board of County Commissioners. You have ones that are attached to fire departments, and you have ones that are attached to sheriff's offices. It's about a third in each group in the state of Florida. So it's a little bit easier for us because we are part of the sheriff's office. So getting a criminal background check, getting the vetting background check is part of what the sheriff's office does for everybody who's part of the sheriff's office. But no matter where you're located at, getting a criminal background check is relatively simple. All you have to do is contact either your municipal police department or your county sheriff's office, and they will have a form that you fill out. There's a small fee sometimes based on the fact that this is for pseudo-governmental work. They may waive that fee, but there is a small fee that would have to be paid. And if I had to do that, if we did not have access because we were part of the sheriff's office, that monies could come out of my general fund because it is a resource that I'm supporting to be able to supplement my agency.
Okay, great. Do you have any recommendations on how to obtain a ham radio license during the COVID pandemic?
Bill, I might turn that over to you. We're still running classes in Nassau County even during the pandemic, but Bill, do you have anything on that?
But we're pretty aggressive. We advertise probably, we have about once a quarter we have a technician's course. About once a year we'll have a general course, and once a year we usually have an extra course. So the technician's course is the license, it's the fundamental license, and you're able to use all of the VHF and UHF radios, and that's 90% of what we're using in the EOC and in our shelters. So look in the newspapers. You can go to the ARRL website and ask for a listing of where the next courses are, because they're published. And you can do a technician course in probably eight weeks, one night a week, maybe 10 weeks, 10 couple of hours, and then you take a test, 35 questions, and you get done, and you're a technician. And if you go further, we've had people take that technician course, took that license, and then at the same time took a general license. Several of those guys, they got perfect scores on both of them, and they're now general licenses. So, and they can do more HF, long distance kind of communications. So look in the newspaper and go to the ARRL website, ARRL.org, and ask for where our course is going to be offered.
Okay, thank you. Next question, what training do you expect of ARRS operators, and do you also teach them proper etiquette such as EOC operations and working with other first responders?
Sure. We actually have an EOC handbook that kind of it covers some of that based on etiquette at the Emergency Operations Center and how each section interacts with each other. We're a hybrid system. We use the ESF system, but we also use the ICS system, and we are split up into sections. So it spells out what that hierarchy, how the information gets passed from section to section. In addition to that, we hold the ARRL group to the same policies and procedures, operational directives that everybody at the sheriff's office has to fall under, minus beards. We do allow the ARRL people to have a beard. The rest of the sheriff's office cannot, and that's just based upon the fact that they are volunteers. We do allow them to have a beard. But we have regular meetings with the fire department, the other county and city agencies throughout our jurisdiction, and our partners in the bigger jurisdictions like Jacksonville and St. Augustine, St. Johns County, and Clay County. And they have that opportunity to come in contact with the directors of those facilities, the police officers, the firefighters, the governmental employees, and other ARRL groups to kind of learn that process. Now, when it comes to ICS training, we require them to take 100, 200, and 700. We do offer a 300 and a 400 class here in Nassau County at least once a year, except for during COVID. We just started that operation back up. But I will actually use general funds or grants that we may have available to us to send them away for training if I have to send them to Jacksonville or even further away to get their 300 and 400. But then we also encourage them to take ComL courses, any kind of course dealing with communications. And then if they have a specialized way that they want to go in the ICS system, like I mentioned before, I have a planning section chief that has been credentialed through the state of Florida to be a deployable planning section chief. He decided that's what he wanted to do. I actually went on a few deployments with him. He did a really good job, so we paid for him to go to planning section chief and a couple of other classes falling under the planning section. And it's worked out extremely well for us.
Okay. Our next question, what role has the Nassau ARRL played in the COVID pandemic? Any communication assist for vaccine transport to rural areas?
No, we haven't had that problem. ARRL hasn't dealt with the communication side of things, dealing with the transport of vaccines, because we are part of a larger metropolitan area of Duval County and the city of Jacksonville. They have provided assistance with the administration of vaccine centers between registering people once they show up for the vaccine. We require everybody to have an appointment. We do not have any open pods where people just show up to get vaccinated. So we have an entire process of checking people in, ensuring that they have an appointment, and getting them on the way to getting vaccinated. In addition to that, we used ARRL a couple of weeks ago because we have started seeing a small decrease in the demand for vaccine as we move down the age groups. And we've had a couple of appointments at pod locations that weren't filled, so we used ARRL to actually reach out and locate some people to fill those appointments, which worked out very well.
Okay, great. There are some questions around the county watch officers. Now, is this specific to Nassau County, or is that common? Is it a function in NIMS?
No, it's not a function in NIMS. But it is pretty common in the state of Florida. Most county watch offices are not manned as much as ours is. Like I said, we have a very robust group. We moved in about a year and a half ago, maybe it might be closer to 2 years ago, to having 8 hours a day, 5 days a week coverage. Prior to that, we had 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. I know several counties in Northeast Florida in the general area that have maybe once or twice a week they have somebody in the county watch office. But again, especially with COVID and vaccines, obviously everybody in emergency management is extremely busy. But my CWOs will come in here when they hear that we have a large accident on I-95, roads closed down, we start seeing flooding in some of our areas because of inclement weather. they're able to just walk across the hallway into my office and advise me, this is what's going on, and I would have had no idea because I'm dealing with everything else that comes with the pandemic. So it's something that people should really look into if they have the ability to do it and they have the space to do it. It is very beneficial.
Okay, we've also received some questions about benefits for volunteers. So does the EOC provide workman's comp or other insurance for ARRLs? And can you speak more about MOUs between volunteers and the EOC or the Emergency Management Agency?
Sure. ARRLs being a group that's not, it doesn't have to be affiliated with the Emergency Operations Center. It can be a group of ham radio operators that just form a club and never have any kind of relationship with the EOC. So they've already taken the time to identify the volunteers. They've been through a vetting process with them, whatever that may be. When they come to you as an emergency management director and they want to volunteer their services to you, instead of having individual agreements with every volunteer in that group, you can provide an MOU or an MOA, depending on which way your department likes to go, and have the agreement with the group itself. Now, the way we do that here, like Bill said, we have over 100 ham radio operators in Nassau County that are generally affiliated with ARRLs. The ones that do not come into a shelter or a CWO or don't have a lot of direct contact with emergency management, we do not put them through the full police background check, have background investigators go out and canvass their neighborhoods. But we still have that MOU with them that we can just in time them with a quick NCIC, FCIC criminal records check, obviously. But we have a group of 120 some odd people that we can pull in, and that's because of that MOU that we have with them.
Okay, we have another comment from an audience member. They say that local police and EMS where they live are digital and scrambled. Any ideas on how to keep up with local emergency communications? As a ham, this is very frustrating.
And I definitely understand that. When I started in law enforcement, we were still on VHF, UHF. Back in the 90s, it wasn't until the early 2000s before we got the 800 megahertz system here in Nassau County. The only way I know to have a effective way to monitor the 800 megahertz system is to have a county watch office like what we have here. They have the 800 megahertz radios in there that they're able to listen to because they've been through CGIS and our full vetting process. So they don't have to worry about descrambling our encrypted 800 system because they have the radios to do that. Now, they don't take those radios outside of the office. If they're going home, they're done with their shift, but while they're here, they're able to do it. Now, there are some scanners that claim that they can descramble encrypted 800 megahertz radio transmissions. I don't believe that's true, but there are people that say they can do it. But the only way that I know of is to have a radio inside the CWO like we do.
Okay, and one last question. Would you recommend utilizing ham radios as a method of redundant communication for healthcare in a state like Montana? Would the wide spaces and lack of current infrastructure be a barrier? What do you think? Actually,
I'm not familiar with all of Montana. I know that they do have mountainous regions. Mountains obviously are going to cause you a problem, and Bill could probably speak a lot better on that. Wide open spaces are not a problem. I've heard them tell stories about being able to bump the signal all over the place, even outside the country from Nassau County. Using it as a backup communication system, I definitely think that is something that you need to look into. We actually, with our state watch office in Tallahassee at the Division of Emergency Management, that's one of our communications that we've identified with them that we are going to use in case we lose our landlines, lose our IP phones, lose our data, lose our cell phones. That is one of the ways that we list with them that we are going to communicate. And it is effective. Like I said before, with Jackson County, they couldn't even drive down the street 60 miles to get to Tallahassee to advise somebody in person what they needed. because there were trees, large pine forests that were blown down. They couldn't get out. They couldn't get a message out any other way, but they were able to get it out through ham radio operators.
Okay, thank you so much, Phil and Greg, for joining us today. Do you have any closing comments?
Just thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak to you.
I agree. It was. I hope it was useful. We enjoyed it, and we think it's a good. We think it's a good story, and others ought to consider it.
Okay, great. So thank you, and thanks to our audience for joining us today. Today's slides are available to download in the box on the bottom of your screen labeled Download Here. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and take some time to answer a few brief questions about our webinar today so we can continue to provide informative and engaging webinars. You can see the polls on the screen now, and thank you and have a great day.